In the mahogany-paneled conference room of Thornfield Associates, while the rest of the family leaned forward with eager anticipation as the lawyer's voice droned through grandmother's final wishes, my son Marcus and I sat frozen as the cruel reality sank in. The remaining estate is to be divided equally among all grandchildren, Mr. Thornfield announced, his gaze deliberately avoiding ours, with the exception of Marcus James Anderson. The room fell silent for a moment before his uncle's smug laughter broke the tension. "Guess some lessons come with a price tag," he muttered to his wife. I wanted to grab Marcus's hand and leave that suffocating room immediately, but before I could say a word, my 16-year-old son stood up, looked directly at the lawyer with a confidence that surprised everyone in the room, and said something that made Mr. Thornfield drop his papers and the entire family gasp. Something that turned everything upside down. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The morning had started with such different expectations. I'd watched Marcus iron his only suit the night before, the one we'd bought at a thrift store for his school presentations. He'd asked if we should bring flowers for grandmother's grave after the reading, and I'd smiled, thinking how she would have loved that gesture. She'd always favored Marcus, spending extra time teaching him about literature and history during our visits. Or so I thought. We arrived at the law office 15 minutes early, parking our old Honda next to a row of gleaming BMWs and Mercedes. Marcus straightened his tie nervously as we walked through the glass doors, past the marble fountain in the lobby, up to the 23rd floor where Thornfield Associates occupied an entire level. The receptionist, a woman with perfectly styled silver hair and a smile that didn't reach her eyes, checked our names off her list with barely concealed disdain. The conference room was exactly what you'd expect from a firm that handled Old Charleston money. Dark wood panels, oil paintings of stern-faced judges, and a table so polished I could see my reflection in it. As we entered, I noticed how the family had already arranged themselves. Uncle Robert and Aunt Patricia sat closest to where the lawyer would speak, their teenage daughter Madison scrolling through her phone with manicured nails that probably cost more than our grocery budget. Cousin David and his wife occupied the next seats, their twin 8-year-olds fidgeting in uncomfortable silence. Then there was Uncle Stephen, grandmother's youngest son, sitting with his new wife Jessica. At 25, she was younger than some of his children, wearing enough diamonds to fund a small charity. They'd all nodded politely when we entered, the kind of acknowledgement you give to distant acquaintances rather than family. The message was clear. We were there, but we weren't really part of this. Marcus had always been different from the rest of the grandchildren. While they went to private schools and spent summers at exclusive camps, he attended the local public high school and worked weekends at the community center teaching younger kids how to read. While they collected designer shoes and the latest gadgets, Marcus collected books from library sales and volunteered at the animal shelter. He'd never seemed to mind the differences, but I always wondered if he noticed how his cousin's eyes glazed over when he talked about the science fair he'd won or the short story he'd written for the school magazine. Mr. Thornfield entered precisely at 3 o'clock, his silver hair immaculately styled, carrying a thick folder and an expression that revealed nothing. He was a man who'd probably delivered news both wonderful and devastating with equal professional detachment. After the customary greetings and condolences, he began reading the will with the mechanical precision of someone who'd done this countless times before. The early parts were expected. Charitable donations to grandmother's favorite causes, specific items to longtime employees, personal mementos to close friends. Then came the moment we'd all been waiting for. To my beloved grandchildren, he began, and I felt Marcus tense beside me. Madison Roberts, David Roberts Jr., Sarah Roberts, and Michael Anderson, Stephen's children. I leave the following. What followed was a list that made my heart sink deeper with each word. Madison would receive grandmother's jewelry collection, worth easily 6 figures. The twins would inherit her art pieces, including 2 original Monets she'd proudly displayed in her sitting room. Michael, at barely 12 years old, would receive a trust fund that would provide him with financial security for life. I watched Marcus's face carefully, searching for signs of hurt or anger, but he kept his expression neutral. Years of being overlooked had taught him to guard his reactions. I reached for his hand under the table, finding it surprisingly steady. Then Mr. Thornfield cleared his throat in a way that made the room grow quieter. The remaining estate, including the house on Rainbow Row, the summer cottage in Polly's Island, and all financial assets, is to be divided equally among all grandchildren. He paused, and his eyes briefly met mine before continuing. With the exception of Marcus James Anderson. The silence that followed was deafening. I felt the air leave my lungs as if someone had punched me in the stomach. Around the table, I could see the mix of reactions. Some showed surprise, others satisfaction, a few embarrassment. But it was Uncle Robert's reaction that cut the deepest. "Well," he said, leaning back in his chair with a smile that never reached his eyes, "I suppose Grandmother knew who really belonged to this family." His wife placed a cautioning hand on his arm, but he continued. "Guess some lessons come with a price tag. Maybe now you'll understand what real family means." The cruelty of his words hung in the air like poison. This was the man who'd never missed an opportunity to remind us of our place in the family hierarchy. The one who'd made subtle comments about my divorce, about our modest apartment, about Marcus's scholarship to attend family gatherings. I'd tolerated it for years, hoping that blood would eventually mean something more than bank accounts and social status. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. I felt Marcus shift beside me, and panic rose in my chest. I knew that look, the one that appeared when he'd finally had enough of being treated like he didn't belong. With his sense of justice and quick tongue, I was terrified he'd say something that would burn whatever bridges we had left with this family. But Marcus surprised me. Instead of exploding or shrinking into his chair, he stood slowly, his movements deliberate and calm. Every eye in the room turned to him as he reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. His hand was steady as he unfolded it, and his voice was clear and confident when he spoke. "Mr. Thornfield," he said, looking directly at the lawyer, "before we proceed any further, I think there's something you should read. This is a letter my grandmother gave me 6 months ago when she was in the hospital. She made me promise to bring it to the will reading if anything ever happened to her." The paper rustled in the absolute silence as he handed it across the table. Mr. Thornfield's professional composure wavered for the first time as he recognized the letterhead, his own firm's stationery. With shaking hands, he unfolded the document, and as his eyes scanned the page, his face went completely white. I need to see authentication of this document," he stammered, reaching for his briefcase with fumbling fingers. This is impossible. We had very specific instructions about the will's contents." Uncle Robert leaned forward aggressively. "What kind of game is this? That boy is trying to manipulate." But Mr. Thornfield held up a hand to silence him, his attention completely focused on comparing documents. Minutes passed as he examined letterheads, signatures, and seals. Finally, he looked up, his professional mask completely gone, replaced by a mixture of confusion and something that might have been fear. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, his voice hoarse, "it appears we have a significant problem. This document, bearing the same authentication marks as your grandmother's will, contradicts everything we've just read. According to this letter, specifically marked as a codicil to the will, Marcus was to inherit not just an equal share, but the family's most precious possession, something that changes everything about what we've just discussed." The room erupted. Uncle Robert started to object loudly. Aunt Patricia demanded to see the document. Madison looked up from her phone for the first time all day, and Uncle Stephen's young wife began whispering urgently in his ear. But through all the chaos, I watched Marcus. He stood perfectly still, not triumphant or angry, but with a quiet dignity that reminded me exactly why his grandmother had loved him so much. As Mr. Thornfield called for order and began making urgent phone calls to verify the documents, I realized something profound was happening. Marcus hadn't just presented a piece of paper, he'd shown everyone in that room what integrity looked like. He'd waded through the humiliation, the cruel comments, and the deliberate exclusion, not because he was weak, but because he trusted that truth would reveal itself when it needed to. What happened next would change not just the reading of that will, but how this family, and I, understood what inheritance really means. Because sometimes, the most valuable things we pass down can't be counted in dollars or listed in legal documents. Sometimes, the real inheritance is the courage to stand up for what's right, even when the whole world seems stacked against you. The chaos in that conference room was just beginning, but I already knew that whatever grandmother had planned, whatever secret Marcus had carried for months, it was about to teach all of us lessons we never expected to learn. And as I watched my son stand there with quiet confidence while his family members demanded answers they weren't ready to hear, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Pride that had nothing to do with money or property or social status. Pride in the young man who had learned that the most powerful response to cruelty isn't anger or revenge. Sometimes, it's simply standing up and telling the truth, even when your voice is the only one speaking. As the lawyer's phone calls continued, and family members argued among themselves, Marcus finally looked at me. His smile was small but genuine, and in his eyes, I saw not the hurt child who'd been excluded from family gatherings, but a young man who understood something the rest of us were just beginning to learn. The real inheritance had already been passed down, and Marcus had been carrying it all along. Now it was time for everyone else to discover what he'd known all along, that sometimes the greatest gifts come to those who are brave enough to wait for them. Mr. Thornfield ended his third phone call and set down his BlackBerry with trembling hands. The authentication department had confirmed what none of us wanted to believe. The document Marcus presented was absolutely genuine, bearing the same notarization marks, watermarks, and legal seals as the original will. What's more, it was dated 2 weeks after the will we'd just heard, making it a valid codicil that superseded the previous terms. "Marcus," Mr. Thornfield said, his voice barely above a whisper, "do you understand what your grandmother wrote in this letter?" My son nodded solemnly. "She explained it to me when she gave it to me. She said I'd know when the time was right to share it." The lawyer's hands shook as he adjusted his reading glasses. "Ladies and gentlemen, I must inform you that this codicil fundamentally changes the distribution of Mrs. Elizabeth Anderson's estate. According to this document, Marcus James Anderson is to inherit." He paused, swallowing hard. "He is to inherit the entirety of the estate, including all properties, financial assets, and personal effects." The silence that followed could have been cut with a knife. Then, as if a dam had burst, everyone started talking at once. "That's impossible!" Uncle Robert slammed his fist on the polished table. "Mother would never—" "There has to be some mistake," Aunt Patricia interrupted, her perfectly composed facade cracking. "Marcus barely even visited." "She was senile," Uncle Stephen snapped, his young wife nodding vigorously beside him. "She didn't know what she was doing." Through it all, Marcus stood quietly, not gloating or defending himself, just waiting. Mr. Thornfield raised his hand for silence, but the family continued their protests until Madison suddenly spoke up. "Wait," she said, her voice cutting through the chaos. "What about the rest of the letter? You said there was more." Mr. Thornfield looked grateful for the interruption. With shaking hands, he continued reading. However, this inheritance comes with specific conditions. Marcus must choose within the next hour whether to accept this bequest or— He looked up at my son with an expression I couldn't quite read. Whether to redistribute it according to the original will, in which case he would receive nothing. The room fell silent again. My heart raced as I tried to process what I was hearing. Grandmother had given Marcus the power to choose, inherit everything or give it all away and walk away empty-handed. But why? What was the purpose of this impossible choice? Uncle Robert was the first to recover his voice. Well, that settles it then. The boy will obviously keep it all. Like mother, like son, I suppose. His voice dripped with contempt, and I felt Marcus tense beside me. Actually, Marcus said, speaking for the first time since he'd given the lawyer the letter, there's more to Grandmama's letter. Mr. Thornfield, if you would continue reading? The lawyer's eyebrows shot up as he returned to the document. Yes, there is indeed more. Mrs. Anderson writes, the choice Marcus makes will reveal not just his character, but the character of this family. I have watched for years as money and status became more important than love and kindness. I have seen how my wealth created distance between us, turning family gatherings into competitions and inheritance discussions into battles before I was even gone. I watched as each family member's face changed, some growing angry, others ashamed. But Grandmother's words weren't finished. Marcus has shown me what our family could be. He visits not for what I might give him, but simply to spend time with me. He listens to my stories, helps with my crossword puzzles, and brings me books he thinks I might enjoy. He's never asked about my will, never hinted at what he might want to inherit. When I was in the hospital, he was there every day reading to me, bringing homework to do in my room so I wouldn't be alone. Tears stung my eyes as I remembered those difficult months. Marcus had indeed spent hours with his grandmother, sometimes missing basketball games or social events to sit by her bedside. I'd been proud but also worried. A teenage boy shouldn't have to choose between his own life and caring for an elderly relative. But Marcus had never complained, never acted like it was a burden. Mr. Thornfield cleared his throat and continued. I leave the choice to Marcus because I trust him to do what's right. Not just what's right for him, but what's right for this family. The choice isn't really about money. It's about whether we can remember what truly matters. The letter went on, but I was watching my son's face. The weight of the decision was clearly on his shoulders, but there was something else there. A peacefulness I didn't expect. Around us, the family had grown quiet, perhaps finally understanding the magnitude of what Grandmother had done. But that's not all, Mr. Thornfield said, his voice gaining strength. Mrs. Anderson has included specific instructions for how this choice is to be made. She's requested that each family member present today share one memory of Marcus, a real memory, not a fabricated one, and explain how they've shown him family love during his life. The silence was deafening. I saw Uncle Robert's face redden, Aunt Patricia look away, and Madison's eyes widen as she realized what was being asked. Uncle Stephen shuffled in his seat, while his wife examined her manicured nails intently. I can't, Aunt Patricia began, then stopped, her voice breaking slightly. We never really— Uncle Robert started, then fell silent. It was Madison, who finally spoke up, her young voice trembling. I don't have any. I mean, I remember Marcus being at family parties, but we never really talked. I always thought he was just different from us. She looked at her parents, then at Marcus. I'm sorry. One by one, each family member admitted what I'd always known, but hoped wasn't true. They'd never really made an effort to know. Marcus. They'd seen him as the scholarship kid, the one whose mother had divorced into their family, the outsider who didn't quite belong. Through it all, Marcus listened without judgment, his face showing no anger or satisfaction at their admissions. When they'd all spoken, or failed to speak, Grandmother's letter had one final condition. If Marcus chooses to keep the inheritance, Mr. Thornfield read, he must promise to use it not for himself, but to create something that brings this family together in the way money never could. If he chooses to give it away, he must forgive them for treating him as less than family, and they must promise to welcome him truly for the first time. I felt my breath catch. Grandmother hadn't just left money. She'd left a choice that would either heal this family or expose once, and for all how broken it had become. Marcus stood up slowly, and every eye in the room followed him. He walked to the large window overlooking the Charleston harbor, his hands clasped behind his back. We all waited, the tension so thick I could barely breathe. When he turned around, there was something different about him. The quiet 16-year-old who'd entered this room had been replaced by someone older, wiser, more confident. His voice was steady when he spoke. "Grandmama knew exactly what she was doing," he said, a small smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "She taught me something during all those hospital visits, all those afternoons in her garden, all those times we talked about books and life and what really matters." He looked at each family member in turn, and I was amazed to see compassion rather than judgment in his eyes. "She told me that families are like gardens. You can throw money at them, but if you don't plant the right seeds, kindness, time, genuine care, you get weeds instead of flowers. You get a beautiful facade with nothing real growing underneath." Uncle Robert shifted uncomfortably. "Marcus, whatever you decide, we'll understand." But Marcus held up a hand, his gesture startlingly mature. "I've made my decision." He walked back to his chair but remained standing. "I choose to give it all away. Not because I don't want it, and not because I'm trying to be noble. I choose it because Grandmama was right. This family needs something money can't buy." The gasps around the room were audible. Aunt Patricia's hand flew to her mouth, Uncle Stephen looked shocked, and Madison's phone clattered to the table. "But," Marcus continued, his voice growing stronger, "I have conditions too." Mr. Thornfield raised an eyebrow. The letter actually anticipated this possibility. "Please continue." Marcus pulled a folded paper from his pocket. Another paper none of us had seen. "Grandmama and I wrote this together during one of our last conversations. She said if I chose to redistribute the wealth, I could add my own requirements." He handed the paper to Mr. Thornfield, who scanned it quickly, his eyebrows rising higher with each line. This is extraordinary." "Read it aloud," Marcus said firmly. "They need to hear it all." Mr. Thornfield cleared his throat. Marcus's conditions are as follows. First, the inheritance will be divided equally among the grandchildren as originally planned, but each portion will be placed in a trust that can only be accessed for education, charitable giving, or family emergency needs. I watched as the adults' faces changed. This wasn't the windfall they'd expected. Second, the lawyer continued, each family member must participate in monthly family gatherings for the next year, hosted rotating between homes. Not fancy restaurants or clubs, but actual homes, with home-cooked meals and genuine conversation. Uncle Robert began to object, but Marcus cut him off. Third, each family must choose a community service project to work on together. Not just write checks, but actually volunteer time. Fourth, before any inheritances are distributed, everyone present today must spend a full day with Marcus, individually, doing something he chooses. No phones, no interruptions, just time together. The room was absolutely silent as the final condition was read. And fifth, if anyone refuses these conditions, their portion of the inheritance will be donated to charity, and they will be excluded from all family functions going forward. I stared at my son in amazement. He'd turned what could have been a moment of triumph into an opportunity for real change. Instead of keeping millions for himself, he was using grandmother's gift to try to rebuild the very relationships that had broken down over the years. Madison was the first to speak. "You're really giving it all away? Everything?" Marcus nodded. "Money without love is just paper with numbers. Grandmama taught me that." "But why?" Uncle Stephen asked, genuinely puzzled. "You could have anything you want." For the first time since reading the letter, Marcus smiled. A real warm smile that reminded me of his grandmother. "I already have what I want. I have memories of hundreds of hours with Grandmama. I have stories she told me, wisdom she shared, time that no amount of money could buy back." He looked at me, and I felt my heart swell with pride. I have a mother who worked 3 jobs to make sure I could attend family gatherings, even when she couldn't afford the gas. I have a life full of people who love me for who I am, not what I might inherit. The shame on the family members' faces was palpable now. They were realizing what they'd lost, what they'd never even tried to find. "The real inheritance," Marcus continued, his voice soft but clear, "isn't the money or the houses or the cars. It's the relationship I had with Grandmama. It's the way she believed in me when others didn't. It's the time we spent together, the lessons she taught me, the love she gave freely." He paused, looking around the room one more time. "You can keep the money if you want, but what I really hope is that we can start building something worth inheriting. Actual relationships, real memories, genuine family." Mr. Thornfield adjusted his glasses, clearly moved by what he'd witnessed. "Mr. Anderson, I need to inform you that your grandmother apparently anticipated this exact decision. There's one final clause to her will that I'm authorized to read only if you chose as you did." Marcus looked surprised. "What does it say?" The lawyer's voice was warm as he read, "My dearest Marcus, if you're hearing this, it means you've chosen love over money, family over wealth, relationships over riches. I'm not surprised. This is exactly who I knew you were. As your final inheritance, I leave you something that truly can't be taken away. The knowledge that you are loved unconditionally, that you've shown our family what real character looks like, and that you've proven money has no power over a heart that's already full." There wasn't a dry eye in the room, including mine, but Grandmother's letter had one final surprise. "Also, my dear boy, check your trust fund. The one I set up when you were born and never told anyone about? It's not part of the estate I'm giving away today. I've been adding to it every Christmas, every birthday, every excellent report card. It should be enough for you to attend any college you choose, with plenty left over for whatever dreams you want to pursue. And I've already set up certain surprise scholarships at 3 universities under your name. Trust me when I say that sometimes the greatest gifts come to those who never ask for them." Marcus sat down hard, clearly stunned. Around the table, family members looked at each other with new eyes. The roles had been reversed so completely that I wasn't sure anyone knew where they stood anymore. Uncle Robert was the first to break the silence. "Marcus," he said, his voice rough with emotion, "I owe you an apology. A big one." "We all do," Aunt Patricia added quietly. Marcus looked at me, and I nodded encouragingly. "Thank you," he said simply. "But let's not just apologize. Let's do better. Grandmama gave us all a gift today, the chance to start over." As Mr. Thornfield began explaining the practical details of implementing Marcus's conditions, I watched my son interact with his family members. There was no smugness, no sense of revenge or triumph. Just a young man who'd learned from his grandmother that the best way to defeat cruelty is with kindness. The best way to handle rejection is with grace. And the best way to deal with exclusion is to open your arms wider. The afternoon sun was setting through the conference room windows, painting the mahogany paneling in golden hues. In a few hours, we'd drive home to our modest apartment, but something fundamental had changed. Not just in our bank account, though grandmother's secret trust fund would certainly change our lives, but in the very fabric of our family. As we prepared to leave, Madison approached Marcus hesitantly. "That day with you," she said, fidgeting with her phone. Could we maybe go to a bookstore? You're always reading stuff I've never heard of, and maybe you could show me something good." Marcus's face lit up. "I'd love that. There's this poetry section that Grandmama introduced me to." Watching them talk, really talk, for the first time in years, I realized that the most important moment in that conference room hadn't been when Marcus chose to give away millions. It had been when he chose to give his family another chance. Because sometimes the greatest inheritance isn't what you receive, it's what you choose to give away. Over the following weeks, something extraordinary began to unfold. The first family gathering under Marcus's conditions was scheduled at our modest apartment, and I watched with amazement as Uncle Robert arrived 30 minutes early, carrying a homemade casserole. This was a man who hadn't cooked a meal in 20 years, whose idea of family dinner was reservations at the country club. "I thought," he stammered, standing awkwardly in our narrow hallway. "I thought maybe I could help with dinner." Marcus appeared from his room, looking genuinely surprised but pleased. "That would be great, Uncle Robert. Mom's making her famous lasagna, but we could definitely use more food." I watched them navigate our tiny kitchen together, Uncle Robert asking about spices and cooking times like a student eager to learn. Every few minutes he'd glance around our apartment, really seeing it for the first time. Our secondhand furniture, the books stacked everywhere because we couldn't afford more bookshelves, the photos on the walls documenting years of Marcus's achievements that none of them had bothered to attend. "You won state in debate?" Uncle Robert asked, pausing at a photo of Marcus holding a trophy. 2 years running," Marcus said casually, checking the oven. "And this science fair. You built a working wind turbine?" "It wasn't that complicated," Marcus shrugged, but I could see him warming to the conversation. Uncle Robert studied the photos for a long time. How did we not know about any of this? The question hung in the air, heavy with implication. Marcus looked at me, then back at his uncle. "You never asked," he said gently, without accusation. "And I guess I stopped trying to tell you after a while." When the rest of the family arrived, the dynamic was unlike anything I'd experienced in 15 years of family gatherings. Madison immediately gravitated toward Marcus's bookshelf, pulling out volume after volume and asking for his recommendations. The twins, David and Sarah, were fascinated by Marcus's computer setup, where he'd created a program to help the community center kids with their homework. Even Uncle Stephen, usually glued to his phone, put it away completely when Marcus showed him a video of the robotics club he'd started at school. "You did this with donated computer parts?" Stephen asked, genuine admiration in his voice. But it was Aunt Patricia who surprised me most. She arrived with a shopping bag full of board games, actual board games, not the kind of forced entertainment that usually defined family gatherings. "I remember," she said to Marcus almost shyly, "your grandmother mentioned once that you loved strategy games. I thought maybe." She trailed off, uncertain. Marcus's face lit up. "Dominion? That's actually my favorite. How did you know?" "Mother kept a list," Patricia admitted, pulling out a worn piece of paper from her purse. A list of things each grandchild liked. I found it in her desk after the reading. I've never seen it before. She handed the paper to Marcus, who unfolded it carefully. His eyes widened as he read. "She knew I liked hiking, and that I wanted to learn Italian? How did she?" "She asked," Patricia said quietly. "When you visited, she listened. We never asked." The evening that followed was a revelation. We played games, shared stories, laughed together. Uncle Robert told us about his first job, working construction to pay for college. A story none of us had heard because he'd spent so many years cultivating an image of effortless success. Madison shared her poetry, hesitant verses that revealed depth I'd never suspected. The twins taught us all a card game they'd invented. But it was when Marcus brought out his guitar that the real magic happened. I didn't even know he could play. He'd been taking lessons for months, paying for them with his community center wages. He strummed a few chords, then began singing Bridge Over Troubled Water in a voice that reminded me startlingly of his grandmother. The room fell silent. Uncle Stephen's eyes were wet. Aunt Patricia was crying openly. Even Madison, typically unflappable, sat with her mouth slightly open. "Grandmama loved that song," Marcus explained when he finished. "She taught me the words during one of her hospital stays. She said it reminded her that families should be bridges for each other." "Play another," Uncle Robert asked hoarsely. "Please." Marcus played for an hour, a mix of classic songs and ones he'd written himself. One was about feeling invisible, about always being on the outside looking in. Another was about finding strength in unexpected places. The last was about forgiveness, not the kind that erases hurt, but the kind that transforms it into something useful. When he finished, the room was quiet except for the sound of traffic outside our window. Then Uncle Robert spoke, his voice rough with emotion. "Marcus, I need to tell you something. About all those family events you missed, all those invitations that somehow didn't reach you. It wasn't an accident." The room went dead silent. I felt my face flush with anger, but Marcus just looked at his uncle steadily. "I know," he said quietly. "You know? I figured it out when I was about 12, when cousins would mention parties. At school that they'd all attended, when I'd see photos later on social media." Marcus set down his guitar. At first it hurt a lot, but then I realized something. He looked around the room, meeting each person's eyes. "I realized that you all were hurting too. You'd built this wall of money and status, and it was keeping out the very things you actually wanted. Connection, purpose, real relationships." Uncle Robert buried his face in his hands. "God, kid, I'm so sorry." "The thing is," Marcus continued, "Grandmama saw it too. All of it. She told me once that she watched you all competing for her approval with expensive gifts and business achievements, while I just showed up to play checkers and help her tend her garden. She said it broke her heart." Madison looked up from where she'd been staring at her hands. "Is that why she did this? With the will?" "She wanted to shock you into remembering what family really means, but she also wanted to make sure that, if you couldn't learn, I wouldn't be left with nothing." Marcus smiled sadly. The secret trust fund wasn't really about money. It was her way of saying that even if you all rejected me completely, I'd still be okay. We sat with that for a while, the weight of grandmother's strategy sinking in. She'd protected Marcus while simultaneously creating an opportunity for healing. It was masterful in its complexity. Uncle Stephen finally spoke. "The community service project. Do you have something in mind?" Marcus nodded. "Actually, I do. There's this after-school program downtown that's losing its funding. They serve kids whose parents work multiple jobs, kids who'd otherwise be on their own from 3 to 8 every day. Grandmama volunteered there sometimes." "How much do they need?" Aunt Patricia asked. "It's not just about money," Marcus said quickly. "I mean, yes, they need funding, but they also need mentors, people who can help with homework, teach life skills, just be there." I watched as something shifted in the room. These people who'd spent years competing with each other were suddenly focused on something bigger than themselves. "When do we start?" Madison asked, and I heard determination in her voice I'd never heard before. Over the next hour, they planned. Uncle Robert, it turned out, had been a youth baseball coach in college. Aunt Patricia had teaching credentials she'd never used after Madison was born. Uncle Stephen worked in tech and could help with computer literacy. Even Madison, despite her age, had skills in social media and graphic design that could help with fundraising. By the time everyone left that night, they'd committed to spending every Saturday at the community center. But more than that, they'd begun to discover aspects of themselves they'd forgotten in their pursuit of status and wealth. The next week was Marcus's first individual day with a family member. He'd chosen Uncle Robert, requesting they spend the day hiking, not at some exclusive resort, but on public trails in the Francis Marion National Forest. I waited nervously for them to return, imagining all the ways Uncle Robert might complain about the heat, the bugs, the lack of amenities. But when they came back, both were sunburned, dirty, and grinning. "Mom, you should see!" Marcus burst through the door. "Uncle Robert knows so much about trees and birds. He used to be an Eagle Scout." Uncle Robert looked embarrassed but pleased. "Haven't thought about that stuff in decades. But walking with Marcus, listening to him talk about environmental science, watching how excited he gets about conservation." He shook his head. "Made me remember what I used to love about the outdoors before I got caught up in boardrooms and golf courses. They'd spent 8 hours together, just talking. About nature, about dreams, about the pressures of family expectations. Uncle Robert shared stories about growing up as the eldest son, how he'd felt forced to be perfect, to always succeed, to never show weakness. I realized, Uncle Robert told me later, that I'd been treating Marcus the way my father treated me, like he had to earn love through achievement. But Marcus never needed to earn anything. He just needed to be accepted for who he was. Madison's day with Marcus was equally transformative. She'd reluctantly agreed to visit the animal shelter where he volunteered, expecting to take a few selfies and call it done. Instead, she spent 6 hours learning about animal care, fell in love with a senior dog that had been returned multiple times, and ended up adopting him on the spot. "I never realized how much work goes into taking care of these animals," she told the family at the next dinner. And Marcus knew every single dog's story. He'd spent hours with this one dog, teaching it to trust again after it was abused. Watching him with these animals, I've never seen such patience. She paused, looking down at her new dog, a graying retriever mix named Buddy. "I've had everything I wanted my whole life, but I never took care of anything that needed me. Not really. It feels different. Good different." Each family member's day with Marcus revealed layers of connection they'd never explored. The twins discovered his love of board game design. He'd been creating his own games for years, and spent their day playtesting his creations and offering suggestions. Their parents found them at our apartment well into the evening, surrounded by prototypes and diagrams, talking excitedly about game mechanics and balance. Uncle Stephen's day was perhaps the most surprising. Marcus had chosen to visit a coding boot camp for underprivileged kids, where Stephen ended up teaching an impromptu class on entrepreneurship. Watching these kids, many from backgrounds similar to Marcus's, chase opportunities like Stephen once had, he saw himself differently. "I'd forgotten," he told me later, "why I got into tech in the first place. It wasn't for the money. I wanted to create things that would help people. Somewhere along the way, I got caught up in stock prices and market shares and forgot about the actual impact." The final day was Aunt Patricia's. Marcus had requested they cook together, not just any cooking, but preparing a meal for a family living in transitional housing. They spent the day shopping, cooking, and delivering meals, Patricia in her pearls and designer clothes, working alongside Marcus in the kind of kitchen she'd probably never imagined entering. When they returned, Patricia was quiet in a way I'd never seen. Finally, she spoke. "The mother we delivered food to," she said slowly. "She thanked us, but she wasn't embarrassed. There was such dignity in the way she talked about their situation, about how she was working 2 jobs while going to school to become a nurse. She reminded me of someone." She looked at me directly for the first time that evening. She reminded me of you, Claire. All those years after your divorce, when you were struggling, when Marcus was wearing secondhand clothes to family events, when you were exhausted from working multiple jobs. I thought you were just stubborn, too proud to ask for help. She paused, her voice breaking slightly. I never realized you had that same dignity, and I never offered help because I was afraid it would make me uncomfortable. I was afraid you might actually need us. The transformation in our family was remarkable, but it wasn't without challenges. There were still moments of awkwardness, old patterns that died hard. Uncle Robert sometimes caught himself making comments about money or status. Aunt Patricia struggled with being in our modest apartment, though she was clearly trying. Madison had moments where her privileged perspective showed, though she quickly apologized and listened when corrected. But the breakthrough came during our third family dinner, this time at Uncle Robert's house. Instead of the formal dining room, he'd set up tables in the kitchen, family style. The meal was simple: burgers on the grill, store-bought sides, nothing fancy. I want to tell you, all something, Uncle Robert said as we gathered. After spending that day with Marcus, after starting to volunteer at the community center, I've been thinking about what Mother really wanted to teach us. He looked around the table, his eyes settling on Marcus. She wanted us to understand that the real inheritance isn't money. It's the values we pass down, the way we treat each other, the amount of love we leave behind. He paused, clearly emotional. Marcus has already inherited what mattered most. He has her kindness, her wisdom, her ability to see the best in people, even when they don't deserve it. Madison spoke up. At school, I've been telling people about what Marcus did, about giving up millions of dollars for his family. Some of them think he's crazy, but others are saying they wish they had a brother like that. The thing is, Marcus said quietly, I didn't give up anything. I gained everything. I gained a real family. Uncle Stephen leaned forward. The quarterly dinners we planned, the community service, all of it. I know Mother required it for the inheritance, but I hope we continue even after the year is up. I've been thinking about that too, Aunt Patricia admitted. These past few weeks have been, well, they've been the first time I've felt like part of a real family in years. There was a moment of quiet, then Uncle Robert raised his glass. To Mother, for knowing us better than we knew ourselves. And to Marcus, for showing us what it means to choose love over money. But Marcus raised his hand before anyone could drink. Can I add something? We all nodded and he stood up, his young face serious but warm. To Grandmama, yes. But also to second chances. To learning that it's never too late to build real relationships. And to understanding that the best things in life aren't things at all. As we clinked glasses, actual glasses, not fine crystal, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. Genuine happiness at a family gathering. Not the strained politeness of the past, not the undercurrent of judgment and competition, but real joy. Later that evening, as we prepared to leave, Madison pulled Marcus aside. I've been thinking about college, she said. I've always just assumed I'd go wherever. Looks best on paper, you know? But watching you, seeing how you choose things because they matter to you. She paused, looking vulnerable. Do you think you could help me figure out what I actually want to do with my life? Not what looks good to other people, but what would actually make me happy? Marcus's smile was radiant. I'd love to help you with that. As we drove home that night, Marcus was quiet, staring out the window at the Charleston streetlights. You okay? I asked. He turned to me, and in the dim light of the car, I could see tears on his cheeks, but he was smiling. I just realized something, he said. For years I thought I wanted them to love me, but what I really wanted was for them to be the kind of people I could love. And now they are. That night, As I watched my son do homework at our small kitchen table, I marveled at what had transpired. Grandmother hadn't just left an inheritance, she'd left a roadmap for transformation. A way for a broken family to find healing, for hearts hardened by pride to soften again. But most importantly, she'd shown all of us that the greatest legacy isn't what you accumulate, it's what you inspire others to become. 6 months after the will reading, our family had transformed into something I never thought possible. The monthly gatherings had evolved into weekly check-ins, spontaneous visits, and a group chat that actually focused on sharing meaningful moments rather than surface-level pleasantries. But the real test came when Marcus received his acceptance letter to MIT. I found him sitting on his bed, staring at the letter with an expression I couldn't read. When he looked up at me, his eyes were shining with tears. But whether from joy or fear, I couldn't tell. "It's real," he whispered. "Full scholarship, plus the grants Grandmama set up, and they want me in their advanced environmental engineering program." I sat beside him, remembering all the nights I'd watched him work on complex equations at our tiny kitchen table, all the science fairs he'd won with projects built from recycled materials, all the dreams he'd shared about solving the world's energy problems. "You don't seem as excited as I expected," I said gently. He looked down at the letter again. "I am excited. It's everything I've worked for, but—" He paused, struggling with something. "But what? But what if I leave and everyone goes back to how they were? What if this family thing we've built only works because I'm here to remind them?" My heart broke a little, hearing the weight he still carried. Even after all the changes, part of him still felt responsible for holding everything together. Before I could respond, our doorbell rang. Marcus groaned. "I hope that's not another college counselor. I've already decided." But when I opened the door, I found Uncle Robert, Uncle Stephen, Aunt Patricia, and Madison all crowded on our small porch, looking excited and slightly out of breath. "Is it true?" Madison burst out. "Did Marcus get into MIT?" Behind them, I could see the twins bouncing in the back seat of Robert's car, while David and Sarah peered out the windows with huge grins. "How did you—" I began, but Uncle Robert held up his phone. "Marcus texted Madison. Madison told me. I called Stephen. He called Patricia." Robert grinned. "We broke some speed limits getting here." They pushed past me into our small living room, filling it with excited energy. Marcus emerged from his room, still holding the letter, looking overwhelmed. "MIT!" Aunt Patricia squealed, catching him in a hug that nearly knocked him over. "Oh, honey, I'm so proud of you." "We're all proud," Uncle Stephen added, clapping. Marcus on the shoulder. "This is incredible." But through the celebration, I noticed Marcus watching their faces carefully, as if trying to memorize this moment. I realized then that his fear wasn't really about them reverting to old patterns. It was about leaving this newly discovered family just when it was becoming real. Uncle Robert must have sensed something too, because he suddenly grew serious. "Marcus, can I talk to you for a minute? Privately?" They stepped onto our small balcony, leaving the rest of us inside. Through the sliding door, I could see them talking intently, Robert's face animated as he spoke. When they came back inside, Marcus looked different. Lighter somehow, but also more determined. "I have something I want to tell everyone," he announced. When we'd all gathered in a circle, some on our secondhand couch, others on floor cushions, he took a deep breath. "Uncle Robert just told me something that Grandmama said to him a few months before she passed. She said that the hardest part of loving family isn't gathering them together. It's having the faith to let them spread their wings when they're ready to fly." He looked around at each of us. "I was scared that if I left for college, you'd all forget what we've built here. But Uncle Robert reminded me that what we've built isn't dependent on me being here. It's something you all chose to create because you saw the value in it." Madison nodded vigorously. "Marcus, you changed us. You showed us what we were missing. We're not going back to the way things were because we don't want to be those people anymore. Besides, Aunt Patricia added with a smile, it's only 4 years, and there are holidays and summer breaks and video calls. Actually, Uncle, Stephen interjected, looking a bit sheepish, we've been discussing something. A surprise. He pulled out his tablet, showing us blueprints and photographs. You know the community center where we've been volunteering? The one that was losing funding? We nodded, wondering where this was going. Well, it turns out the building next door just went on the market. The family's been talking and we've decided to buy it. We want to create the Elizabeth Anderson Center for Youth Development. My jaw dropped. This was a massive undertaking, both financially and organizationally. It would have computer labs, tutoring rooms, art studios, a commercial kitchen. For cooking classes, even a small gym, Uncle Robert continued excitedly. And Marcus, we want you to be involved in the design. This summer, before you leave for MIT, we want your input on everything. Marcus was speechless. Finally, he found his voice. You're naming it after Grandmama? We're naming it after the woman who taught us what really matters, Aunt Patricia said softly.
But honestly, it's as much about your vision as hers. You showed us these kids, their potential, their needs. You made us care. And the best part, Madison added, is that when you're home from college, you'll have a place to work on all those environmental projects you're always talking about. We're planning a whole wing for sustainable technology research. I watched my son process this information, saw the emotions playing across his face. Gratitude, excitement, hope, and something I'd rarely seen from him. A deep sense of belonging. And there's something else, Uncle Robert said, reaching into his briefcase. We've been working with Mr. Thornfield on this. He handed Marcus an official-looking document. As Marcus read, his eyes grew wider. The Anderson Family Foundation? Oh, he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. It's already established and funded, Stephen explained. We've each contributed to the initial endowment, but we want you to be the primary director when you graduate. It will fund environmental initiatives, youth programs, educational scholarships, all the things you care about. But how? The money from the inheritance. Marcus looked confused. We realized something, Aunt Patricia said gently. The money we inherited wasn't really ours. It was a gift, but it came with a responsibility to use it the way Mother would have wanted, to make the world better, especially for people like you. Like us, Madison corrected firmly. We're all in this together now. That evening, as the family finally dispersed, and I watched Marcus carefully place his MIT acceptance letter and the foundation documents in his desk drawer, I reflected on the extraordinary journey we'd all taken. A year ago, I would never have imagined this scene, our modest apartment filled with family members who genuinely cared about Marcus's future, who saw him not as an obligation, but as an integral part of their lives. The next few months flew by in a whirlwind of graduation preparations, foundation planning, and family adventures. Marcus threw himself into designing the youth center with an enthusiasm that rivaled his college preparation. He spent hours with architects, educators, and the kids at the existing center, gathering input and refining plans. One afternoon, I found him in the center's old computer lab, surrounded by rough sketches and a group of elementary school kids. Mr. Marcus, one little girl named Keisha was saying, can we put windows everywhere? I like the light. Absolutely, Marcus replied, making notes. Natural light helps people learn better. What else? A place for games that aren't on computers, suggested another boy, like board games and puzzles. And a quiet room for when things get too noisy, added a shy girl named Maria. Sometimes I need to think. I watched as Marcus incorporated each suggestion into his designs, treating these children's input as seriously as if they were board members. This was the legacy Grandmama had really wanted. Not just a family that functioned, but one that used their privilege to lift others up. Madison had become Marcus's closest collaborator on the project. She'd deferred her own college admission for a year, choosing instead to work on the foundation's social media presence and community outreach. Watching her interact with the kids, seeing her genuine care for their futures, I marveled at the transformation in this young woman who had once seemed so disconnected from anything meaningful. One day, she approached me as I picked up Marcus from the center. "Mrs. Anderson," she said, then corrected herself with a smile. "Aunt Claire. Can I ask you something?" I'd told her many times to call me Aunt Claire, but old habits died hard. "Of course, sweetheart." "Do you think Grandmama planned this? Not just the will thing, but everything that's happened since?" I considered the question carefully. "What do you mean?" "Like the foundation idea, the youth center, even me taking a gap year. It's all exactly what she would have wanted, isn't it?" Before I could answer, Marcus emerged from the building, saying goodbye to a group of kids who clearly adored him. As we walked to the car together, Madison repeated her question. Marcus thought for a moment. "You know what I think? I think Grandmama planted seeds. What happened to those seeds? Whether they grew into something beautiful or withered away, that was up to us. We chose growth," Madison said simply, and in those 3 words I heard the summary of everything that had changed in our family. As graduation day approached, the family decided to throw Marcus a party, not at a fancy venue, but at the youth center, the old one before the renovations began. All of Marcus's school friends were invited, along with the kids from the center, our family, and even Mr. Thornfield, who had become something of a family counselor through all of this. The party was unlike any family celebration we'd ever had. Kids played games that Madison had designed. Uncle Robert manned the grill with several teenagers who peppered him with questions about business. Aunt Patricia taught a group of girls to braid friendship bracelets, and Uncle Stephen had set up a coding demonstration that had both kids and adults fascinated. But the moment that will stay with me forever came when Marcus stood up to thank everyone. "A year ago," he began, his voice carrying in the now quiet room, "I thought family meant sharing the same blood. I thought love had to be earned, that belonging was something granted by others." He looked around the room at his MIT classmates mixed with kids who'd aged out of the foster system, at his uncles and aunts sitting comfortably beside teenage mothers from the community, at Madison teaching a 5-year-old to use her camera phone. "Grandmama taught me that family is what you choose to build. It's the time you invest, the care you show, the way you lift each other up. This room right now, this is family. Not because we're related, but because we've decided to matter to each other." There wasn't a dry eye in the room as he continued. "I'm going to MIT, yes, and I'm excited about what I'll learn there, but I'm not leaving home. I'm carrying home with me, and I'm bringing what I learn back to this home, to this community, to this family that chose love when choosing money would have been easier." Mr. Thornfield, who had been largely silent through the party, stood up. "Excuse me," he said, his usually polished voice rough with emotion. "I've been practicing law for 40 years. I've read hundreds of wills, mediated countless family disputes, watched greed tear families apart and love hold them together. In my professional opinion, Mrs. Elizabeth Anderson orchestrated the most brilliant piece of family intervention I've ever witnessed." He looked at Marcus with something approaching awe. "But young man, what she started you completed. You chose to see the best in people who had shown you their worst. You chose to believe in family that had excluded you. And you chose to use an enormous gift, not for personal gain, but to create a legacy that will outlast all of us." As the party wound down and people began to leave, Keisha, the little girl who had wanted windows everywhere in the new center, tugged on Marcus's shirt. "Mr. Marcus," she said, holding up a crayon drawing, "I made this for you to take to your new school." The picture showed the youth center with huge windows, just as she'd requested. But in front of it was a rough drawing of our entire extended family, holding hands in a circle that included what must have been 50 different people. "See," she explained, pointing at each figure, "this is your Uncle Robert, who teaches baseball, and this is Madison, who helped me with my poetry, and this is your mom, who always asks about school, and this is you in the middle because you brought everyone together." Marcus knelt down to her level, and I saw tears in his eyes. "Thank you, Keisha. This is the most beautiful picture anyone's ever given me." "The center will be finished when you get back, right?" she asked. "You promise you'll come back?" "I promise," Marcus said solemnly. "This is my home. These are my people. College is just a detour to help me come back and make things even better." That night, as our family cleaned up together, something that would have been unthinkable a year ago, I found myself standing with Uncle Robert, both of us watching Marcus pack up boxes of thank you drawings from the kids. "You know what's funny?" Robert said quietly. "I spent most of my life thinking success meant having the biggest house, the best car, the most money in the bank. But these past 6 months, helping these kids, being a real uncle to Marcus, cooking dinner in your tiny kitchen, I've never felt more successful." Before I could respond, he continued, "Mother didn't just leave Marcus money. She left him a test, a choice. Keep everything or give it away. He chose to give, and in doing so he gave us all something we didn't even know we were missing." "What's that?" Robert smiled, watching as Marcus high-fived one of the teenagers who had helped clean up. "Purpose, real purpose. Not just making money, but making a difference." As August approached and Marcus's departure for MIT drew near, I found myself both excited for his future and worried about the void his leaving would create. He had become the central connecting point for our family, the one who organized gatherings, mediated conflicts, and somehow made everyone feel valued. But I needn't have worried. The family had truly internalized the lessons Grandmama had tried to teach. Uncle Robert continued grilling skills classes at the youth center every Tuesday. Aunt Patricia started a financial literacy program for teenage girls.
Uncle Stephen mentored coding classes for kids who couldn't otherwise afford them. Madison divided her time between the Foundation's social media and a creative writing program she'd started for young people aging out of foster care. The week sigh. Before Marcus left, we had one last family dinner at our apartment. It was crowded, loud, and chaotic. All the things our old formal gatherings had never been. But it was also warm, genuine, and full of love. As dessert was being served, a chocolate cake that Madison and Marcus had made together, Uncle Robert stood up. "I have something to say," he announced, waiting for the room to quiet. "Tomorrow, Marcus leaves for college, but he's not really leaving. He's extending our family circle. And that's fitting, because this whole year has been about expansion, expanding our definition of family, our understanding of wealth, our capacity for love." He raised his glass of apple cider. "To Marcus, who taught us that the best inheritance isn't what you receive, but what you choose to pass on. To Grandmama, who knew exactly what she was doing. And to all of us, for choosing to become the family she always believed we could be." As everyone raised their glasses, Marcus stood up too. "Before we toast," he said, "I have something for everyone." He disappeared into his room and returned with a stack of envelopes, each marked with a family member's name. "These are letters," he explained. "Letters I've written to each of you, to be read when you need reminders of what we've built here. When it gets hard to remember why this matters, when you're tempted to go back to old patterns, open your letter." He handed them out one by one, and I watched as each person received theirs with reverence, as if they were holding something precious. "And this," he said, turning to our family photo wall, "is for all of us." He'd created a collage, photos from the past year mixed with printed emails, text messages, and quotes. In the center was a list titled "The Anderson Family Values," written in Marcus's careful handwriting. 1. Time is the most valuable currency. 2. Kindness always costs less than cruelty. 3. Real wealth is measured in relationships. 4. Everyone deserves a seat at the table. 5. Love is a choice we make every day. 6. Forgiveness is a gift you give yourself. Growth requires uncomfortable honesty. 8. Legacy is what lives on after you're gone. At the bottom, in Grandmama's distinctive handwriting, was a note none of us had seen before. "Marcus, if you're reading this, it means my plan worked. You've taught them what I could never tell them, that the best families aren't born, they're built. Every day, with intention, with love, with the courage to choose each other over and over again. I'm proud of you. I'm proud of all of you. Your grandmama." The room was absolutely silent as we absorbed this final gift from the woman who had orchestrated it all. Then Madison spoke up, her voice thick with emotion. "She knew," she whispered. "She knew all along how this would turn out." "No," Marcus said gently. "She hoped. She planted the seeds and trusted us to water them." As the evening wound down and family members prepared to leave, each one took time for a private goodbye with Marcus. Through the chaos of hugs, promises to call, and last-minute advice, I felt a deep sense of peace. This was what family was supposed to feel like. Not perfect, not without challenges, but real, committed, loving. After everyone left, Marcus and I sat on our balcony, watching the Charleston lights twinkle in the distance. "Are you nervous?" I asked. "About leaving?" He was quiet for a long moment. "A little, but not about leaving. About living up to what Grandmama saw in me, about being worthy of their love." I took his hand, this young man who had somehow become wiser than his years, who had transformed not just his own life, but the lives of everyone around him. "Sweetheart," I said, "you don't have to earn their love anymore. You have it. Freely given, no strings attached. That's what real family means." He smiled, and in the lamplight, I could see both the boy he had been and the man he was becoming. "I know. And I finally believe it." The next morning, as we loaded Marcus's car for the drive to Boston, the entire family showed up to see him off. There were tears, of course, but they were good tears. Tears of love, pride, and gratitude. As Marcus hugged each person goodbye, I heard snippets of conversation. "Text us as soon as you get there. Remember, if you need anything. We'll FaceTime every Sunday night. The research lab will be ready when you get back. This isn't goodbye, it's see you later." When he got to me the last hug, we held each other for a long moment. "I'm proud of you," I whispered. "For everything, but mostly for who you've become." "I couldn't have done any of this without you," he replied. "You taught me strength when I was young, and now this family has taught me what to do with that strength." As his car disappeared around the corner, I felt arms around me, the family he'd transformed, now supporting each other through the bitter sweetness of his departure. We stood there together, not saying much, just being present for each other. Later that day, I found a letter on my pillow, one Marcus had left for me. Through tears, I read his words. "Mom, by the time you read this, I'll be on my way to Boston. But I wanted you to know something. The best part of this whole year hasn't been the inheritance or even the transformation of our family. It's been watching you realize that you deserve all the love you've given to others. You spent so many years protecting me from their rejection, never asking for anything in return. You worked multiple jobs so I could attend family functions. You sacrificed so much so I could chase my dreams. Now, finally, you have a family that sees your worth, that supports you, that loves you the way you've always loved others. Grandmama's gift wasn't just for me, it was for all of us. But especially for you, Mom. You're not on the outside anymore. You're not the one who has to prove she belongs. You're home. I love you always, Marcus. Reading those words, I finally let myself cry. Not tears of sadness or frustration, but tears of gratitude. Gratitude for a grandmother who saw potential in brokenness, for a son who chose love over money, and for a family that had learned to choose each other. That evening, as I prepared for my first family dinner without Marcus, my phone rang. It was him calling from his dorm room. "How's Boston?" I asked. "Amazing," he said, and I could hear the excitement in his voice. "But you know what? I miss our tiny kitchen already. And Madison just sent me photos from tonight's dinner. The twins were teaching Uncle Robert some card game?" I laughed. "Yes, and Aunt Patricia tried to make your grandmother's cornbread from memory. It was an adventure." "Tell me everything," he said. And for the next hour we talked about family, dreams, and all the beautiful messiness of love. As I hung up the phone, I realized something profound. We had all inherited something far more valuable than money that day in Mr. Thornfield's office. We had inherited each other. And that inheritance would keep growing, multiplying, transforming lives for generations to come. Because sometimes the greatest legacy isn't what you accumulate in life. It's the love you leave behind, the connections you nurture, and the courage you inspire in others to choose what really matters. Grandmama had known this all along. She just needed Marcus to teach the rest of us. And teach us he had. The Anderson Family Foundation launched officially the following spring, with Marcus as its youngest board member, participating via video call from MIT. At the ceremony, held in the newly christened Elizabeth Anderson Center for Youth Development, Mr. Thornfield read one final letter from Grandmama. "If you're hearing this, it means my family has learned what I always hoped they would learn, that true wealth has nothing to do with money and everything to do with how much love you can hold in your heart and how much you're willing to give away. The real inheritance was always in your hands. You just needed the courage to claim it." As I looked around that ceremony, at Marcus beaming from the laptop screen, at Madison teaching a group of kids to design websites, at Uncle Robert coaching a little league team, at Aunt Patricia reading to toddlers, at Uncle Stephen explaining coding concepts to teenagers, I knew Grandmama's legacy was secure. We had chosen love. We had chosen each other. And that choice had made all the difference. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.